Hello, may I have your attention? Thank you. Namaskar and good afternoon. Someone is really busy. Thank you. May I request all of you to please put your phones on silent mode? Thank you. In a vast country like Bharat, every state has its own beauty, its own tradition, its own legacy. Likewise, the same goes for Kashmir. Now, this, when we talk of tradition and beauty, it is not just showcasing the wisdom of choosing indigenous resources, but also blending it with fine and delicate craftsmanship, all of which adds much character to that place which we call our home, as well as our own homes and our cupboards. Cupboards by meaning the weaves that we drape ourselves with. In this stage talk, we have two speakers who have been tirelessly working at reviving, preserving, and conserving the traditional forms of art and design. Manish Saksena, who heads Aadyam Handwoven, an entity of Aditya Birla Group, closely works with weavers and the communities all throughout the country, and Kashmir is one such cluster. While Aadyam focuses on textiles, we have with us Sameer Hamdani, an architect and conservationist, an art historian who will be sharing with us his knowledge and showcasing photos which will bring to us the intriguing, the captivating building designs of that we see in Jammu and Kashmir. I will stop here because their presentation is just very captivating. So let us hear more about Kashmiriyat from Manish and Sameer. Give them a round of applause, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon to you. I think we already have the context, but I would just take a few minutes to just put a little more context as to why Aadyam is doing this. So Aadyam, like you already know, that we work in various clusters. We work in various clusters in India, and Kashmir happens to be one of the endearing ones that we work with. Whenever we talk of textiles, we feel that it's all about storytelling. It's actually about what goes around, what the entire ecosystem, the entire culture of that place. And that is actually what gives textile its signature. So it's always very important for us to actually delve into that, and which is how this idea came up. We actually had done a walk with Sameer earlier as well when we had done a media trip to Kashmir, and it was such a wonderful, insightful one that he became our first choice when this conversation idea came up. And then he also has this book which he has just come out with, which is called City of Kashmir. So history was not one of my favorite topics ever. I mean, it was not something where I scored well also. But this book has been written in such a conversational style, and there is so much like a commentary as well as a dialogue as well as humor, and all of this makes it a very interesting book. So we will talk about the book also. But before that, we'll just play a 1 minute film to just give you the context of what we do in Kashmir as well. Sound is not coming. you've seen the setup outside, but we have a few pieces here. So there's Kani weaving and Sozni. But yeah, coming to the conversation now. So I think in your prelude itself, you mentioned that Kashmir actually Srinagar is one city where the past and the present don't seem to sort of coexist. And I think it's also because it has gone through so much of destruction, reinvention, different kingdoms have come and gone, and it is sort of almost every time when a resurrection has happened, it has given a new language and a direction to the topography of the city. Uh, why do you feel that? And do you think that today's present is actually something? Uh, because in other cities it seems to coexist in a much better, in a much more cohesive way. But somehow here it is like a chalk and cheese kind of coexistence, which you keep jumping from one side to the other as you go through the city. And what should be done about it, and what is really the cause for it?
Um, Hi, thanks for having me here. What should be done about it? I mean, I'm a conservationist per se, but I don't believe in interventions in cities. I don't believe in intervention in our lives, which would sort of impose a vision of past upon the present. I mean, it goes against totally against my training. It goes totally against my profession as an architect, as a conservationist. It's almost in hearsay, but I do feel that we live in a time and a period wherein we are what we are. We exist in multiple cultural existences, if I can say the word so. So I think the question with Srinagar, the question with Kashmir is one of resources. It's a rather limited land. And in a limited land, when you build, and the buildscape is something that is really important, it gives you your first character of a city. I mean, this is a book about the urbanity of the city. It's about what Kashmir is. So the question is that the buildscape, when it is a resource, there's a resource crunch. When you don't have that amount of resources, what do? There tends to be a certain amount of uniformity. There tends to be a certain amount of similarities. And as I've said in the book, the only difference between a house which would be of a rich city merchant and a house which might belong to a baker or a labor is the sheer scale. The only thing that is going to differentiate a poor man's house from a rich man's haveli is the scale. Otherwise, the material, the technique, the way you build, everything is similar. And this happens all across. So then the question is, all of a sudden, you're in a totally different milieu. I mean, you can get Makrana tiles, you can get Italian tiles, and you can build a home in Kashmir. And many people who have got the money, they aspire to a very European sort of a notion of how a house should be in Kashmir. You can have a Swiss chalet, you can have a English country manor house. Qadri's house is an example. So the question is, do you then impose? It happens in, let's say, in Ladakh. I don't know how many of you have been to Ladakh. If you go to Ladakh, there is a certain sense of uniformity wherein modernity is sort of picturized through a respect for the past. But that is not something that is inherent and organic to the society. I mean, we are what we are in terms of the food, in terms of everything. So the question is, I think, because of the fact that the locale is so small, the geography is so small, what is coming up is so in contrast with what was there in the past. And that is something that might be a reality of our times. It happens in many other cities. I won't see in every city the past and the future is sort of totally in conformity with one another, or they sort of gel in together. See Old Delhi, and the moment you move out of Chandni Chowk or your sort of Karol Bagh area, there's a different Delhi. You go to South Ex, there's a different Delhi. So I won't say Indian cities have been able to sort of rub past and future in a very organic manner, or in a manner in which there is a reflection of the past, while as there is a contemporary, contextual understanding of what past is in the way we build.
You also refer to these two words, adab and mejaz, and I think they are really wonderful words to define the culture of Srinagar. But I feel that these are two words which two other cities which can own it is Lucknow and Hyderabad. So do you think that they sort of form a trilogy in terms of how culture and nuances are seen in these three cities together? Are there any similarities, dissimilarities, whether it is in cultural context or architectural context?
Well, there is a certain amount of historical continuity in terms of the former Suba of Awadh, or the kingdom of Awadh. at least two of the prime ministers of our state were Kashmiris. And you had a good amount of people working for the Nizam here, Kashmiri Pandits as well as Kashmiri Muslims. But again, if I just sort of skip the book totally, there is a word which is a dish we have, tehri, which is the mustard and shallot and rice, right? I think it used to be popular in Hyderabad at one point of time, and the whole idea is that this is a dish. I mean, you find it in UP, you find it all across Awadh, and the story is that this is a Kashmiri Pandit who basically took the dish from Hyderabad and they brought it to Awadh. But then there is an older story. We had it in Kashmir in the 14th and 15th century, and there are references to something like zard pulao, which is the same thing. So basically, what I'm trying to say, in the end, Awadh, Hyderabad, and Kashmir, to a large extent, these are the successor states to the Mughal Empire. And the culture is very Persianate. It's inspired by Persia. There are so many elements of Persian culture which are a part of all the three cultures. So Tehzeeb, Adab is something which basically speaks about city life, a certain urbanness in all the three cities. There can be nuances, there would be nuances, geographical, regional, but overall I would say that yes, there is a certain amount of that uh, aap, hum, which percolates through all the three different cultures. Maybe the language would be different.
You also there's also like historical context, and it actually the book takes you through the entire history from the 6th century onwards, and then somehow in the 7th or the 8th century you use a phrase where you say that it was to be the only great Hindu kingdom left standing by the Durlabhaka of Karkota dynasty. From then to now, it has seen a lot. But now, if I know it's a little difficult question to ask, but if I was to just chronologically ask you to give it Instagram worthy way of telling us that what happened since then to now, so that just get a quick glimpse of what all Kashmir has gone through.
That's not a fair question to me. I'm not on Insta. I was never on Insta. I'm not on Facebook. I avoid all these social media handles. But the book, and I mean, in a larger sense, the question that you're asking is basically how do you locate Kashmir? I mean, if you see it, generally the idea is that this is a sort of an isolated northerly region in the mountains and it's almost cut off from the rest of the world as it is. But historically, if not on the Silk Route, it has been on one of the Silk Routes which have sort of connected Central Asia, China, and South Asia. So the question when you talk about the Karkota dynasty, these are basically a dynasty which comes from down south. Someone comes from down south, and then this is again the period wherein the Gupta Empire is almost gone, is finished, and so there is this notion of a revival, a Hindu revival, a cultural revival. Understand also the fact that Kashmir at this point is a Shivite. There are Buddhists, there are Hindus, but it's a predominantly Shivite culture. But the Karkotas are interested in a very Vaishnavite interpretation of religion. So they have this whole notion of recreating Kashmir not only as a Hindu kingdom, but also a great Vaishnavite kingdom. So there is this question of patronage wherein many Vaishnavite temples come up in Kashmir. But then as we move from, I mean, sorry, just because I tend to forget many things here and there. So you have a period wherein we are a part of our Kushans. So I would say the history of Kashmir as a civilization starts with the Kushans. And Kushans are not native to India. I mean, they come from the Central Asia. Then there are certain people who would say that we have also imbibed from Guptas, then the Karkotas. In between, we are also part of the Hunna Empire, which is the white Huns. I mean, like you have Atalia the Hun, who was rather very famous in Rome, but we had the white Huns coming up in Kashmir in India. And they were predominantly responsible for converting India from a Buddhist to a Hindu land. So then in Kashmir, we have the Karkotas. Then we have a couple of local dynasties, some which have linkages with modern day Afghanistan, the Hindu Shahis, the Kabul Shahis. And then in between, there is this period wherein there is an internal coup in Kashmir. So there is a Tibetan who comes to Kashmir and he acquires the throne of Kashmir. And then incidentally, he converts, becomes a Muslim, and he is the one who sort of lays the foundation of the Muslim Sultanate. So from there, and if I take your Insta, we have what? We have the Sultanate period, almost 2 centuries, then the Mughals, then this Afghan Sikhs and Dogras, then modern India. So that's it.
So I think also this reflects in the architecture because while Mughal era has given a lot of very distinct architecture to the rest of India, and mostly the historical places that we today cherish or we know of are mostly built in the Mughal period. But in Kashmir, there is the Mughal, there is the Mongolian, there's the Tibetan, there is um, a lot of Hindu. So do you think this gives it a very diverse in appearance, or do you think it gives it a very fragmented appearance? Like, do you think it's an advantage to Srinagar that it has this diversity, or is it a negative because it seems like it's a bit of everything?
And that's rather important because the whole question is, I mean, there are many people, and even given the debates that happen across social media, WhatsApp, etc., about the originality of a certain culture. It starts from this point. There's nothing original in any culture. It's always a question of interaction, and it's always a question of borrowing. And in case of Kashmir, we are also borrowing. We are borrowing from the Kushans, we are borrowing from the Hunnas, we are borrowing from the Guptas, we are borrowing from the Mughals. So what you see in the end is this sort of many mirrored elements from different cultures, but then it gets a unified whole. And that is Kashmir. That's your shawl. You might have multiple shawls everywhere, but there's a Kashmiri shawl. And it's again borrowing from the Afghan, it's again borrowing from the Mughals, it's borrowing from the Shamiris. So the whole question is yes, there are these multiple influences which are coming into this small valley. But what is important about the whole process, the cultural process, is that it is the people of Kashmir who are responsible for selecting out of these many influences what they want to retain and in what form they want to retain. That agency is with the people, and that is what gives it its unique cultural ethos, if I could say so.
Now that you mentioned, so in fact, it is also a state where there is a lot of dependence when it comes to economy on the handcrafted and the craftsmanship. And then, of course, there is the entire fruits and dry fruits, and which are very unique to this place. So whether it is the wood carving, whether it's paper mache, or whether it's the textiles, everything. But do you think there is a reason for no other industry having developed in Kashmir other than the handcrafted and the handmade? And why is that so?
I mean, I would say, as a Kashmiri, I would say we are lucky enough to trust our hands still, and we have not been mechanized to the degree that the rest of the country is. It's something rather good. It again, I mean, just see, leave aside the fact that it's a question of infrastructure, electricity, transportation, etc. Industry, where does it work in there? But the question is that in case of craft, imagine someone sitting day and night and then making these 1 inch by 1 inch square, which might have hundreds of stitches there. It, it again speaks about tehzeeb. It speaks about culture. It speaks about a certain frame of mind, which is very inward looking, which is very thoughtful. You might just use the generic Sufi and sort of say it's all that part of that Sufi culture. But I don't care. I mean, you can use any term that you want. But it's a very inward looking society. That's why in my book also I speak about the fact that, and I hope there's no Punjabi here, I like the Punjabis who are rather very vibrant and colorful. Kashmiris tend to be inward looking. And that's true about the city also. I mean, go to Delhi or go to any historical mohalla town, there is a certain amount of loudness there. You don't find that loudness in the historic city of Srinagar.
Also, if you'd like to say, I know that you haven't covered it in the book, but I know you have a lot of commentary about the craftsmen and how their life has been impacted, and how in the past 4 to 5 years, I think there is a sort of an upswing. So, do you agree or disagree, or do you think there is still something that is not right and should be done differently?
Uh, in 2023, I was a part of a team wherein we got Srinagar listed on the UNESCO Creative Cities network, so which was rather good. It gives a certain appreciation of the fact that this has a very rich craft base. But then during the course of the deliberations, while we were talking to the craftsmen, and there were a huge amount of craftsmen, some of them are national awardees, some of them have been awarded with the Padma, what do you call it? One of the Padam Shris, I think, yeah, they're national awardees. But then when you talk to them, all of them are of the opinion that this is a trade and a craft that we don't want to pass on to next generation. Now, understand that in case of Kashmir, like, I mean, in many cases in India, you have crafts which are sort of linked with the family, and that family is a part of a caste system. So there's a certain caste barrier which you want to cross. In Kashmir, many of the crafts, sosami, paper mache, these are not fixed in a certain caste structure. So there is not that sort of a notion of stigma that is associated with a certain craft. But primarily, I think Kashmiris are very, uh, I mean, I don't know how to put it. It's basically a question wherein, one, I think there was this period between the 60s and 70s that most people thought that the best thing in their life that would happen to them, in case you don't become a doctor or an engineer, is to get a government job. So that whole notion of a life which is targeted towards employment in a sort of a salaried uh, sector is something that works for many of them. Secondly, I mean, there is again this notion, I can't say how right or wrong, is that the craft tends to be exploitative of the artisans. Now, this is something that you hear repeatedly. There's this middleman, the term we use, the Vostagar, or whatever you use the term, basically there is this person in between who's making out the huge chunk of profit from the whole scheme. And while the artisan, they don't have insurance benefits, they don't have health benefits. So how does that craft survive? So I think there are issues. There are people who are doing good, they're making money and they're becoming famous. And I think the state is also celebrating them as success stories. These are the people we need to look forward to. But then there is this inherent understanding that as a society, uh, you don't want your son or daughter to be broken into the craft. Maybe it's also about the fact that young people want to be rich and famous, and this is not a judgment of any of them. How many of them would like to sit and stitch? I don't know.
But I also believe that it is the state of craftsmen in most of the country, actually.
Exactly.
But it's just that the rest of the country has been more open to inviting people, or people have gone and done interventions, which has kept the craft, so to say, a bit more alive and contemporary. And therefore, there has been a wave which has been able to sort of revive it or bring it back to the audience in a slightly different flavor. But I think Kashmir, that process has been able to, sort of begin only in the past few years, because there was a period when it was, so to say, politically cut off, and therefore there was less of the external intervention that sort of helped the craft grow to a level which it could have been accepted more widely.
I mean, that's true, but there's another thing I would like to add is that, I don't know, it's again a part of your tehzeeb. Talk to any Kashmiri craftsman or artisan, and the feel is, the feedback is, they know everything. The work they do is the best work. I mean, somewhere there is this sort of inbuilt pride, which is almost, I mean, I don't know what's the right word to use it, but this tendency to sort of say, we know, we are the best, we don't need to learn. And that's an issue, because the whole idea is about how you improvise. The question is both in terms of the material.
Never stop learning.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the design. And again, it's also about a market. What sells in a market? And there is such knowledge still left in many of the crafts in Kashmir that you could actually factor in for a bigger economy. But yes, there is a level of hesitancy, and then there's the politics.
So I think we'll take a break from the questions, and I'll hand over to you to help us with the visuals that you want the audience to participate in.
Let me see. And can I? Okay, so let me just sort of. So this is rather where you all start from. So this is my ancestral home, the home I was born in, built by my grandfather, and I think we lived in there till I was almost 10 or 12, and then we left. So again, if you see the building, the architecture is something which is a bit colonial, but then it's sort of inbuilt in the local architecture itself. So this is where my rootedness comes in the city and the region as it is. So this is an image I can rather skip. It's just for nostalgia, but still. And now, when you talk about architecture, and this is something I do an exercise when I talk with my students, whether these are architecture students or students at the NIFT, Kashmir, when you Google Kashmiri, when you Google Islamic architecture, so this will be the series of images that will naturally come up. And these are mostly about buildings with domes, and these are buildings with minarets. So this is something that comes, this is a Google search, and the whole thing is this is just a screenshot. But then there's much more. What do you say about this? So this is the old, yeah, exactly. So this is the old city of the Srinagar. It's a very dense city. It's again another of these river-borne cities. But then there's a difference between Srinagar and let's say Varanasi. Varanasi in a way celebrates and opens out to the river. Srinagar to a large extent does not. It's, as I said, the city is very inward looking. So that's something that you get a feel of it once you go from Ghat to Ghat, river to river. And on the other side, you have the principal mosque in the city. I think Hyderabad also must have, aside from the Charminar, there must be a Jamia Masjid somewhere. I'm not too sure about the architecture, though I'm an architect. But this is basically the main Friday cathedral mosque in the city, the Jamia Masjid. Now, this is something that is totally uniquely different from anything that you would experience, let's say, in Lahore, let's say in Delhi, let's say in Awadh, as he said, in any of the city, the Bada Imambara or the Chota Imambara, and then maybe even down here in Hyderabad. So that is basically what it is all about. Architecture which is rooted in a local landscape, architecture which is rooted in the local choice of what we want and what we don't want. So I would say till almost somewhere around 1970s, you hardly had a mosque or a khanqa or a shrine within the Muslim architecture of Kashmir which had a dome. Now, this is a sort of an old image of the Srinagar city, and I just took it from the Google. So this is basically the riverfront, and you can see on the right side you have this famous shrine which is known as the Khanqa Shah Hamdan. It's a Khanqa. The Khanqa is basically, these days, these are Khanqas which are used as mosque, but primarily a Khanqa is something which is like a monastery, it's a mosque, and it's many things more. It's a rather cultural, spiritual hub of a order, a Sufi order. I mean, I don't know, many of you whom have gone to Turkey, you might have seen there is this whirling dervishes, as they call it, the Molai order. So that is a Sufi order, and they practice from a khanqa or a taqiyya. In Turkey, they use the word taqiyya. In Iran and in most of South Asia, you use the word khanqa. And this is the riverfront, the same riverfront. This is a picture that I took in my college days, so this would be somewhere around 1999. So more or less, again now, this is almost a 20, 30 years old picture, but the riverfront is still similar. If I go back, the nature of the city hasn't changed. It's still a low-lying horizontal city. It's again a city which sort of opens out in case of the major shrines and temples. And then these are the gullies and the kochas that you find in and across the city, which I have tried to sort of speak about in the book, wherein you actually get the living, real pulse of the city, basically how we as Kashmiri speaks, how we as Kashmiri live. And this is wherein the art and the craft that they are basically working on is there. I mean, in case you see, there is this house here. And what seems like these sort of pieces of cloth are basically shawls. These are basically shawls that they have just hung up from their balconies, colored, and just left there to dry. So this is something that you would find invariably across the old city, wherein you might find a paper mache artisan, wherein you might find a sosni worker, a shawl maker, someone who's doing basically woodwork.
There's also a word for this hanging balconies and projected balconies, right? What's the word?
What's the word? No. This is a dub. This is we call it a dub. It's like almost like a jaroka that you have in most of planes, but in our case, it's a dub. And in case the dub is at the top, which is we have a word for it. We call it zundab, which is basically a moon pavilion. I mean, this whole story, it's rather very romantic version that you go there and see the moons. Never happens. Invariably, it's the place wherein all the leftovers are stored. You never go there. It's up in the balcony somewhere in the attic. You never go there. You never see the moon. But anyway, this is something that is celebrated in our poetry. It's celebrated in our culture. So there it is. Now, this is something that specifically speaks about the book And again, the whole idea, what the notion of this book is about, what is the basic narrative that this book is trying to build upon, which is basically about land which is linked, interconnected. On the left hand side, what you find is, there is a gentleman down there selling these postcards. So in the Mughal period, we had this art, which we still call the Mughal art, or erroneously, you call it the miniature art. Basically, you have paintings, and with paintings, you also have calligraphy, and these are basically verses. So, what is happening there? The calligrapher is Kashmiri, and he has calligraphed it somewhere in the 19th century. The paper is from a Chinese silk showroom, and the verses are from Hafiz, who's one of Persia's greatest poets. So just think about it. Here, three cultures, three different regions, and if we talk about three different countries are coming together on one single piece of paper, which is in the end a piece of art. And that is what is unique about not only, I would say, Kashmir, but most of South Asia. I mean, if you take away the boundaries that define our modern nation states, we were what we were because of our connections. And once you tear down these connections, you cut down their connections, it invariably sort of makes our life poorer. The next image is basically a tombstone. It's again a 17th century tombstone. It's located in the heart of the city in an area known as uh, Hasnabad. Now, what is interesting is that there are many pious prayers, devotional prayers, which would be there on the tombstone. But then there is also the entire genealogy of the person who's buried there. So he mentions his father. He is himself a Mughal nobleman. A person who came from Iran to the Mughal court is buried in Kashmir. His father was the prime minister of the Shah of Iran, and his grandfather was the chief justice for the Shah of Iran. And then his great grandfather came from the Lebanon, which was then a part of the Ottoman Empire, and he was the main theologian, the Shia theologian of that region. So again, this is a testament to connection between three great empires. So you have the Ottoman Empire, you have the Safavid Empire in Persia, and you have the Mughal Empire in India. So things ordinary traces or remnants of past cultural interactions. And the last one is basically this I got from an online acquaintance. This is actually a permit for trade for a Kashmiri artist, a craftsman family to trade in Tibet. And the seal that you see marked in the red, this is the seal of the Dalai Lama. And then we have these buildings. This, as I said, is the most prominent building that we have. The Khanqah Molla. On the banks, you have the Ghat, you have the temple, which is known as the Kalika Mandir there. The architecture is so unique. You have this spire, you have this sort of monumental use of wood. You don't find it anywhere else within the uh, Muslim architectural genre in South Asia or anywhere else. Now, if you were to sort of dissect each and every element, you'd find that there are certain Mughal elements there. There are, in fact, even some Punjabi elements borrowed from the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. There are certain elements which are Persian. There are certain elements which are Chinese origin. There is a dragon and a motif of a dragon, etc. out there. And then the whole ensemble of these so many different motifs and so many different sort of architectural ideas, the totality is what's unique about Kashmir, how you're able to put all of them together in an image which is uniquely Kashmir. You won't find a similar looking building. Maybe somewhere in Norway you might have something similar, but you won't have the similar scale and details anywhere else. This is a picture of the interiors of this very shrine. And what you actually see is that there are these brocades. These are basically what we would get these brocades primarily from Yarkand, which is in China, maybe some Banaras also coming from down south. But then you have all these Pashmina shawls, which are a part of the interior decoration. So this is again an interesting example of how textiles were used for decorating a shrine at a specific period, which in this case is a Urs. This is something which I rather like. It's a attar, a shop of a attar, which is basically the one who makes essences, perfumes, etc. These days, the only thing they make is rose water, nothing else. I think that's the lump sum of their whole.
The Khan,
It's
opposite
opposite
the
to the
Khan.
Khanka, but then there is this sort of richness to the whole place, these decanters, etc., that are there, frosted, edged. Uh, it again speaks about the question that he said, which is about that there are so many traditional knowledge systems and crafts that are getting lost. It's not only about Pashmina.
Yeah, but this store seems like a time capsule kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Even the person who sits
Yeah,
there, yeah.
exactly. You can make it out. So the question is, uh, while you are trying to save so many things, there are already so many things that have totally passed away from your memory and more importantly from your knowledge system. I'll just skip through some of the pictures. So this is the Jamia Mosque, which I again talked about. And there's a beautiful description about this mosque in Sanskrit written by Pandit Shrivara, who was a let me get my dates correct, a 15th century Sanskrit historian and a poet at the court of the Muslim kings. And the description is rather very beautiful, even in his translation. I unfortunately can't understand Sanskrit, so I am dependent upon the translation out there. So this is basically when we talk about the Buddhist baths of the region. So this is the statue which speaks about the birth of Gautama, or in this case, Siddhartha. It's again from the 10th century onwards. In 10th century, Kashmir or the city of Srinagar is a Hindu kingdom, but you have this continuous patronage of Buddhist art and Buddhist sites there. But then again, you find that there are certain remnants which you find even in a Muslim shrine. So if you notice out there, you have these terracotta spar at the top of the shrine. Uh, they hardly make it these days, but the source is again a stupa, and in this case, we have this votive stupa from Harvan, which shows about how the iconography, how the image is borrowed from somewhere in one religious order, and it becomes a part of another religion. So basically, the whole idea is about continuity. You don't have, I mean, I don't know how many of you, if any, is a student of art or architecture. When we were taught art and architecture, there was this whole notion of there is a Hindu architecture, there's a Buddhist architecture, and there's a Muslim architecture. And the whole idea was they don't mingle. There has to be a break. It's a very colonial understanding of art. But once you see it in your daily lives, you see in the sort of the actual material culture that we have inherited. You see these clean breakages don't occur in history. History is more about an interaction, a continuous process of interaction. And this is another building which is probably the only historical domed building that we get in Kashmir. It's incidentally it's a mausoleum, and it's a mausoleum dedicated to a woman. So the only mausoleum that we have in Kashmir is for a woman, not for a male. The males are all outside, so you can see the graves of the sultans, and this is basically 15th century sultan's mother.
This
The
is really Iran, Tehran kind of.
it borrows from Timurid architecture, which is Samarkand. But if you see, there is this one circular dome, and then there are these four side domes. It's more Byzantine than Islamic. Now, the whole question is what is happening? This is rather very strange. I mean, you must have seen dome buildings all across. This is not a Islamic dome. This is not how Muslims do dome. You would find it in Turkey, you would find it in Istanbul, but these are all basically borrowed from the Byzantine principle. So the question is that the period when this building was constructed is also the period wherein the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Turks. So the general understanding in history is that most of the Byzantine Christians, they all went to Europe, and this is the sort of the flourishing that has to come with the Renaissance. But then there were trade rings which were linking the Byzantine Empire to south. So there is always a possibility that some of the artisans might have migrated this side. So that's just an idea. But what you also find in this building is that on the top you have these sort of terracotta tiles which are studded in the wall. So you find that thing also in Samarkand. Basically, this is a very Zoroastrian practice. It happens in Central Asian fire temples that they used to have at one period. Again, something starts in Central Asia, comes to Muslim uh, Samarkand, and from there it comes to Kashmir. It's all about a continuous movement. I'll just run through the rest of the slide. Uh,
Open for questions, maybe. Yeah. So if you have any questions for Sameer, yes.
We open it up for question and answer. Seerath would like to ask, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamdani. I mean, it is the things that you've spoken about till now. I mean, as a student of culture, I feel like this is so interesting to know and hear and to sort of, pay an ode to our heritage. We've seen that in our history for most of the times, the focus has not been on removing one culture and bringing another, as we see the confluence of the Buddhist culture, then trickling down into the now predominantly Muslim culture. We have been seeing that quite a lot. If I were to talk about it as a contemporary lens with a young person who comes from Kashmir, as far as conservation and town planning is concerned, there's this trend of, especially with architecture and how the city of Srinagar looks, there's this trend of fixing something that doesn't need fixing, because that is the kind of way of life we have seen and lived through, and this is something that sort of talks for us, speaks for us. But now the idea of turning a city into something more which resembles a metropolitan, something that erases it of its identity and culture. Is our city ready for, is our ecosystem ready for something like that, a big change like that? Because that is one sense of individualistic society that our society doesn't know of. We know of a very confluenced, and we know of a very interesting architecture and culture which comes through, as while paying attention and while keeping our own identity alive, we try to make the best out of what is there. But as soon as we are growing up with these modern towns coming up, which we see are more and more alluded to and said to be the modern thing and the right thing to do in 2026, what would be your idea on that?
I mean, it comes back to the question that you raised. And again, I'm going to say I'm going to go against all my training and my profession while answering it. But see, if you say, you're from Hyderabad, you're from Delhi, you want to go to Kashmir for a vacation, you go there with a certain expectation. And your expectation is that Kashmir, because it's in Himalayas, is going to be different than Delhi and Hyderabad. Why? Why shouldn't the native bear the burden of being picturesque for you or for anyone else? That is my personal understanding. And I think if I keep on saying that, I'm going to be thrown out of my office someday soon. But I mean, I personally can't agree with it. I mean, you can't force someone that because you belong to a certain region and that region is vulnerable, that region is sort of, again, has many issues. The identity of that region is pinned on the fact that you preserve it. Why? If a guy in Delhi or a girl in Delhi can wear in a certain manner, why not in Kashmir? Why does she have to have Sozani and a Piran? The rest is all about the fact that where you celebrate it. It should be something that is intrinsic to you. There will be one good example for every 20, 30, 40, or 100 bad examples, not the reverse. If it would have happened, then we would be in a utopia. Unfortunately, we live where we live.
I forgot to mention this earlier, but there is this concept of Jannat, and you mentioned this, that every child is sort of ingrained into them, and when you're born, you sort of start to live with this idea that you are in a Jannat. So, do you think it sort of works as a balm over many things that have happened, and also it's something which is like something which just sort of consoles you, no matter what, you are still in Jannat kind of a thing?
Maybe it's true. It's a sort of something. See, when we come to the rather modern period, the political history of Kashmir has not been that kind to the region itself. I mean, there's suffering, there's killing, there's people have left their homes, so it's all there as a
We'll be
part.
generic on that part.
Yeah. I'm just leaving it there. So, I mean, it's something which is somewhere the idea is that maybe something consoles you. Uh, we have a rather very famous saint in Kashmir by the name of Sheikh Nuruddin Wali. And there is this anecdote about him that once he was mostly living in the wild, so he never lived within any urban city, never lived in an urban setting, sorry. So there is this notion that once he crossed the mountains and he came and he had to look at Dal Lake. And once he saw the Dal Lake, he said, okay, let me go back. And every all of his disciples told him, why are you going back? He said, this is a part of paradise. And I fear in the hereafter, my share of the paradise will be taken away if I have this vision of paradise here. So, yes, maybe in a certain case, in a certain sense, the whole notion of celebrating Kashmir as a heaven is something one, I think, is forced on us as kids. It comes in our school books, it comes in our textbooks, it comes in the Bollywood movies starting from 60s and 70s. I mean, you have to live with it.
But I would like to ask you that, in the past, let's take making a house. It was made in a particular way using slate stones or whatever, wood, etc. Now, how does one actually balance that fine line of conserving, reviving, and preserving what we call the traditional style of construction vis-a-vis, which could actually be far more economical, but a speedier one, which is the modern one? Where is the balance out here?
I mean, for one, the traditional construction systems are something that are very much in vogue everywhere in the construction industry because they are a part of your sustainable, environmental friendly
Exactly.
practices. So, I mean, if you go to any college or university anywhere in the West, these are practices that are celebrated low carbon imprint, low on the energy consumption, and in the end, they're so great. But the question is that uh, I would argue that what is important is the knowledge system behind these constructional practices. In the end, which material you choose is not that important. What is important is the understanding of how these systems used to work and how these spaces used to work. I mean, uh, most people who construct houses in Kashmir, and many of the houses are not properly heated, have 2 or 3 story high atrium, which we call lobbies, at
Yes.
the heart of the house, mostly north facing, and these are coal sinks. Why do you build in that manner? So the question would be again, it's about understanding, and more than that, it's about education. Educating us about what works with us and what works in terms of the resources, what works in terms of the fact that we are living in an area which is in the Himalayas. It is vulnerable to many natural and climatical disasters. So we need to reduce our footprint on the nature, and we also need to build in a sustainable manner as we were traditionally doing. But the question is about education rather than forcing. That's my understanding.
But when you say education, what do you actually mean? I mean, how do you
Okay.
educate a
Okay.
labor force?
I mean, there are a couple of Kashmiris here, they would correct me here. So, in the 50s and 60s, if you're building a house, your flooring would be earthen, mud.
Yes,
Mud is an inert material, it's a good material, it works with your environment, right?
right.
Come to 50s, there's a certain amount of money in the society. So, you have what we call the cement flooring or what we call the IPS. You would see beautiful examples of it in Kerala, the black and the red IPS flooring. You have certain more money, and then you have the terrazzo flooring. By 80s, some of the richer people are doing marble flooring in their houses. And then in the 90s, they realize it doesn't work with our climate. They cover the marble with carpets. That is what is happening. So the question is, if you are able to understand that certain materials have a certain material quality, certain materials don't work with the way we live, and in the area we live, I think it would make greater understanding for how we build rather than just leaving it to building codes. Because let me be very honest, you can have a building bylaw or a code saying build like this, it's going to be ignored.
So is revival of weaves easier than uh,
No, no, it's
architecture?
no, which is why I sort of mentioned, I think we probably wouldn't have thought of going into Kashmir before the 2020 is when we felt that no, we should just get into this region. So I think, yeah, that was one challenge. But the other challenge, which I truly agree with, is this whole thing of craftsmen believing that they already know enough. So I think that is a blocker when you start to, sort of when you do not learn anymore because you have this
Know
for
it
lack of
all.
any other word,
Know it all.
superiority.
Yeah.
But no, it is breaking down, and I think it is breaking down very subtly. But there is a lot to preserve. So you should always be very conscious that you don't distort the signature of the place. So there is a lot to preserve, so it's a very fine line. And I think that's the only thing that can work, because if somebody tries to just make it completely modern, then I think you will just lose the signature forever.
All right. Ah, that is interesting. Let me ask that gentleman.
Hi, my question is like how, oh sure. My name is Mumtaz Ahmed. I'm a PhD student in IFLU. I'm doing my PhD in film studies. I'm trying to look at the history of image making in Kashmir. I'm from Punch. So my question is how we can define Kashmiriyat. Like there another thing, particularly talking about Kashmir Valley. So main thing just comes Srinagar. So again we are somewhere or other, I mean, not talking about the other part of the valley. And then again, if you are trying to look at the Kashmir into the international level, then the whole, I mean, state or the union territory comes into that, okay, it is Kashmir. But at some way or other, we are not able to define Kashmiriyat. And I mean, maybe there will be certain words or way, but again, inside, if you are looking into the Kashmir Valley, there are like certain there are multi-language, but we are talking about only particularly Kashmir, or maximum times we do talk about Kashmir, then there are other languages we are not, I mean, talking about or trying to revive or develop about that. So could you please make a bit detail about that? Thank you so much.
Well, luckily, I have never used Kashmiriyat in any of my books. So you can't ask that question to me ideally. But then I would say Kashmiriyat as a word, as a term, is a politically constructed word. It has a certain political connotations. Leave that as it is. There is Kashmir. There is Kashmiriyat as a political theory or as a political idea. You can defend it, you can sort of question it, depends, but it's a very modern construct. It's again something which is a part of the nation building schemes. So we'll leave it at that. Regarding if the question is about why this book is about Srinagar, I live in Srinagar. I mean, I'm an architect. An architect always wants to do a book about good urban history, which sort of connects to him personally. So that's it. I'm not saying Srinagar. Doing a book on Srinagar means that there is nothing else left in Kashmir but Srinagar. But the fact is also that throughout our medieval history, not medieval, early modern history, so from 14th century up till 19th century, Srinagar was known as Sheher Kashmir, the city of Kashmir. There still today there is only one Sheher, one city in entire Kashmir, which is Srinagar. So it's in a way giving the city its recognition and giving the people who make the city their recognition.
Hi, I'm Tanya. Thank you so much for such a great session, first of all, and thank you for hosting it so well, Manishji. I had two small questions from both of you. I know we are running a bit out of time, but it's very small. First, with the craftsmanship, where you said that there's a know-it-all sort of attitude within the weavers. Manishji, I mean, since you come from a craft background, uh, do you think it is more of a psychological response to the sort of exploitation and to the sort of, like, and because I work with crafts, so I've seen this mostly with a lot, like not just Kashmiris, but like craftsmen all around India, where there's a fear of it evolving, like the craft evolving for worse rather than better. So I think, do you agree that there might be like a more of a psychological barrier because they have seen the bad part of it and they always are fearful of the intention of the person in front of them? That's one question for you. One small question for Hamdani ji would be, Jamia Masjid in Srinagar has a charbagh design which is very uncommon. So I've always had this wonderment where that comes from, because that's a very uncommon sort of thing. So because Mughals rarely constructed mosque in a charbagh design. So is it more of a Persian thing? And do the manicured lawns sort of, because Srinagar didn't really have a lot of British influence as much as you see cities like Delhi and Calcutta sort of having. So that conversion into a manicured lawn instead of a very typical Mughal forest-like lawn, gardens, was it a more of a modern intervention or was it a British intervention? That's
So no, you are absolutely right. I think, and it's something which I experience everywhere. So we work in about 12 clusters, and I think whenever we go to a craftsman, their first body language is hesitation. Their first body language is always about resentment because they have been exploited. And you are right, because even when, I would say, even when designers go, they actually impose a few things and then they still cut corners and they still don't pay them right. And so I think they have this whole baggage. But in Kashmir, I think there is the complexity of this whole political invasion also. So they also feel threatened and they feel that now this is all that we have left. And if this is also taken away, then what is going to be our skill? But I think the way to handle, and I think we have been able to do that over the last 5 years, is to build a trust. So build a partnership kind of a feeling with them so that they start to believe in this, that we are doing something which is in alignment with what they want to do. I think this doesn't work when you try to do it in a way which is an imposing way or something which is against the grain of, because there is a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of aesthetics that sit with craftsmen. And I think that should always be respected. You can never not respect that. Any designer who would do that, I am the gatekeeper to tell them to stop that. Because I think what you can learn from them is immense. So that balance,
But that should be the same for any other
any
cluster
other
that you
cluster.
are
But like I
not.
said, here probably there is a layer of
There's
another kind,
one,
one
yeah,
more
one or two
extra layer.
additional
Which,
layers.
right, yes.
Samir.
So we were never part of the British Empire because we were a princely state. But then the British were always
You can
coming to
put your hand.
Kashmir.
You can put your hand down.
So they were there. We had a residency, and I have a chapter in my book which is about just the Bagh, and it also speaks about the changes that happened to the landscape because of the Britishers. And this is both about the plant species that were introduced as well as the whole idea of a turfed, manicured, mowed garden. But coming to the Jamia Masjid, uh, uh, by Charbagh, I believe you mean that there's a courtyard in the center with these four quarters. Uh, the mosque is basically what we call the courtyard mosque plan, or we also call it the Iranian mosque plan. We also call it the four Iwan mosque plan because it has these four portal gateways at the four cardinal direction. The whole idea comes from Iran in the 10th century, from the Seljuk Iran. The best example of it is the Jamia in Isfahan. The first time that you see this mosque plan in India is at Begumpuri Mosque, which is in New Delhi. Then that mosque plan gets repeated in number of times. Even the Jamia Masjid, the Badshah Masjid are a sort of a variant of that plan. So the question is that the whole plan is there. It's an original uh, 15th century plan. But the idea of doing these four gardens with a tree here and there is something because of the fact that in 1930s the mosque was heavily renovated, and it was renovated by the British Imperial ASI under Sir John Marshall. So the imprints are British.
So, as you say, the influence, like in this case, by the British architect, but I guess as it comes, whenever it was built in the 1500s or 1600s, the influence that was existing then, or something, or whoever was ruling at that point of time, would have wanted a particular style to be built to make it unique. Uh, Probably that could also be the reason why it is so different, and then replicated or made a similar one in Delhi or elsewhere in the country. So wouldn't that be very likely?
I mean, as I said, I have also a book on architecture, so you can read it in case you're interested. So there's something, the plan. The plan is basically Iranian, but the form is very uniquely Kashmiri. So that's why you have these spires. And as I said, there's a verse from Pandit Shri wherein he speaks about the fact that you have these garodas, which is basically the images of garoda on the spar at the corners, so
Okay.
flying Garuda. So
That's Vaishnav
yeah,
influence. Okay.
so I mean, yes, it is something in the end. See, what's basically happening in Kashmir is that it becomes a Muslim ruled sultanate in 1320.
Right.
But the first major arrival of a non-South Asian or a first major arrival of a Persianate caravan of Sufis and merchants and artists happened somewhere around in the 1402. So by the time these Persians are coming to Kashmir, there's already a native vocabulary of a Kashmiri mosque, which is basically directly borrowing from a Kashmiri temple. So just imagine that in case of Kashmir, it's never been conquered by Muslims.
Right.
It's just basically a Buddhist king converts to Islam. But then in these initial 20, 30, 40 years, the court is predominantly Hindus. So the natural tendency would be to fit in, to gel in, rather than to stand aside as a sore thumb.
Right. Right. Very interesting conversation where we have, seen the difference and learned how we can actually, I mean, though you said your office will not be very happy, but I think it is also something that, it makes us think and makes us ponder, how is it that we can balance out what is traditional and what the present needs are, which are burgeoning because the population is such and resources in any case are limited in a country like ours where we have 1.5 billion people, and also a desire to look more modern and step away from what is traditional. Um, but yeah, the heart lies where the tradition is. And thanks to both of you for doing your bit in conserving, reviving, and bringing to us this fantastic talk, presentation, and of course, showcasing the fine craftsmanship. Thanks to Aadyam for that. A round of applause, please. And may I ask a request of all of you to please come for a group photograph?